movement. Mike Quigley joins us now to talk about this. Hello, Mike. How are you?
It's good to be back. I'm fine, thank you.
It is.
I'm reminded by your intro that I marched in my first Pride parade in 1983. You think about the circumstances now, and on one hand you feel pretty good about it. On the other hand, you get nervous because things could go poorly in the fall, and then a lot of progress could go back. But of all things, this week, in a very dark period, then some very good news twice now.
Yes, you're talking about I've got to tell you, there was good news from the Supreme Court. There was also not so good news with the Trump administration trying to make it difficult, if not impossible, for trans people to continue with their health insurance. So, like you said, there's certainly a ways to go. But I've got to tell you, when I read that the person writing that Supreme Court decision was Neil Gorsuch, I had to pick myself up off the floor and. What was your reaction?
I was surprised, and I talked to some constitutional scholars. He passed the plain letter of the law from the 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sex and get past this. But I guess I put nothing past what folks coming out of the Trump administration can do, and obviously very concerned still about what the Supreme Court justice can do. But I think even for him, it would have been, in his mind, impossible to get past the obvious language of the law. And I guess I'll add this. We're talking about LGBTQ plus during Pride Month. And during that first parade, there was only one letter. I remember it. It was the gay parade. Yeah, we didn't have the other letters there, and it means so much now. And I appreciate your bringing up the particular issues relating to the trans community, because that just wasn't talked much about. And as a county commissioner, we did pass some protections on the county, but by and large, it's one of those parts of injustice that wasn't focused on, and never waste a horrible crisis, but let's use this as an opportunity for real change.
Mm-hmm. Well, so many of us, I can remember one of the first interviews I did when I started doing the afternoon show. I had, I can't remember his name. I was a LGBTQ activist, and I had to stop him, and I had to get him to explain, like the different words. Like I had just started hearing cis, and, I was like, what does this mean? And what does this mean? And what does this mean? And I was really worried that he was going to be mad at me or be insulted. But instead, he was like, you could see he was like relieved because so many people don't understand it. And so he got a chance to go on the air and say, look, this is what the language is. This is what we mean. This is, how people identify. And if you're this thing, it doesn't mean you're not that thing. And it was, this was a year ago, and I was still learning. And I think that for a lot of us, we're still learning as this goes on. But I think I guess the good news is that as far as gay and lesbians, I think most people have wrapped their head around the fact that, that's a thing. It's not a choice. It's how you're born. And they're just like us. But I think that when I still see on social media people posting about the fact that trans isn't really a thing. That's not really a thing. That's like a made up thing.
Right. I think that what these times do is it forces us to show what we don't know, and that's embarrassing and it's difficult. And there are times when people say the wrong thing, they said it in the wrong way, And I see it as an opportunity, as you say, to keep learning. And boy, I'm continually learning about so much. As we've learned since Minneapolis, there's still much more to learn there. As we learned with the DACA decision, there's still more to learn there. The Supreme Court decision on LGBTQ plus decision, this helps dramatically in the workplace. We still have a long way to go, and Mitch McConnell still needs to bring the Equality Act to the floor. At the very least, big examples: discrimination in housing, discrimination in education, and as we know now, the COVID crisis has created additional problems within the ICE custody facilities. We sent a letter to ICE, asking them to release LGBTQ asylum seekers from custody because COVID is just ravaging these facilities. And, LGBTQ individuals in ICE custody are already subject to higher rates of abuse than other populations in custody, made a lot worse by the pandemic. We were hearing that ICE is responding poorly to the pandemic by ignoring CDC guidelines. And while they say they've taken measures to deal with this, unfortunately they haven't. And as you reference, LGBTQ, particularly trans, doing horribly, they're treated horribly in facilities. LGBTQ individuals just by themselves are 97 times more likely to be sexually victimized in detention than non-LGBTQ. So, as you say, we have a lot to learn and a lot to improve. But, boy, you have to have victories. And you'll take them wherever you get them. I would say that most policy issues and problems have political solutions. And if the Supreme Court decisions teach us anything, is we were surprised, you and I, by Gorsuch's opinion in there, but it tells us just how important control of the Senate is, because those 5-4, 6-3 decisions could easily go the other way. And as Senator Durbin pointed out, the DACA decision could be very short-lived, and that could be taken back if you read its kind of narrow finding rather quickly. So it's nice to have these victories, but in the final analysis, as you say, we have a long way to go. And I think the pivot point on just about every issue that people who listen to your station care about is November, because of the Senate and because of the White House.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is not something that we can afford to be asleep at the wheel for. This is red alert. This is all hands on deck. This is leave no stone unturned. Nothing could be more important for the future of this country. Along those lines, I want to get your take on this, Mike. I've just in the last week, now maybe it's partly the Supreme Court decision, partly the wretched turnout in Tulsa, partly the fact that, Lindsey Graham said that he wasn't going to replace the Southern District of New York head without the senators signing on. I'm starting to read these, Republicans are not supporting Trump anymore. They're starting to show some backbone. They're starting to realize that he's a sinking ship and they better jump off sooner rather than later. I don't know. Has this just been this week of victories? Is it just a blip on the radar screen? Or do you really think, knowing your colleagues, that we've reached some kind of turning point where they're going to start separating themselves from Donald Trump and his policies?
I've been hoping for that since he took office, but for the majority of that time, the profiles and courage, other than Senator McCain, came from members of Congress who were on their way out. Unfortunately, when they spoke out against the president, it was either on their way out or he helped force them on their way out. Let's not forget that as much evidence as was presented during the impeachment trial, there was only one Republican senator who had the courage to do the right thing. So I think you have to treat it as a blip and continue the pressure. I'll give you just one example. We're going back to D.C. this week, and I suspect the House will pass the Justice in Policing Act. It'll ban chokeholds, no-knock warrants. It'll end qualified immunity. It'll demilitarize police by limiting the transfer of military weaponry. It'll require body and dashboard cameras, and it'll finally make lynching a federal hate crime. I am of the belief, and Steny Hoyer, our majority leader, said this yesterday, that this will probably be a partisan vote. After all the country's been through, and the fact that so many Americans now seem to be behind these necessary changes, dramatic changes, we're probably not going to see it. And then finally, you and I have watched politics in Chicago certainly for a long time. As strong as the president probably felt coming into this year, with, in his mind, the economy leading his political charge, we've all learned that the world can change in the blink of an eye. And there's the two crises, the public health crisis of the virus created the economic crisis, and his extraordinarily poor handling. And the final analysis the world had to see when the president says you can use disinfectant in people, that they finally started to recognize the emperor has no clothes. And then, of course, the way things have been handled in his response to Minneapolis and, again, the critical changes that have to take place there, and just on him. But the world can change in the blink of an eye. We saw an article by Dr. Emanuel in the New York Times about how this president can use the way he manipulates his media, just extraordinary things. Like just before the election, say, hey, we've found a vaccine, it's a cure, it's all going to be better. So I probably worked more campaigns than I've run, and my solid advice is until the election is over,
yep,
I take nothing for granted. Working colleagues, because if all they're doing is, to your point, is following the way the winds are blowing, they'll shift back in a heartbeat if it's in their own interest. Forget what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think you're correct in that. I think that and I know that all the polls show Joe Biden is beating Donald Trump. I mean, heck, even the Fox cable polls show that. But, we have, 4 months till we get to the election. And I do believe that Donald Trump is going to get crazier. And I think the lies are going to be coming as it's hard to believe that they could come faster and more furiously than they have been. But I think that as he sees this slipping away from him, I think that he is going to really ramp up. And I think the next few months are going to be really ugly. And I agree with you 100%. We cannot take anything for granted, not one single thing.
And I encourage people to get behind there's going to be real nuance, and some will be a little more obvious, but real nuance in the next packages. And we've passed several CARES packages. The House passed the HEROES Act, which is $3 trillion, $1 trillion of it to help local government, $25 billion for the post office. What I want folks to focus on, besides all the critical things in there, is the money for election assistance and the post office. The president, as we've seen, already threatened Michigan and other states. He'll come after them if they vote to make voting easier. Mm-hmm. Critical in all this is to avoid the debacle of Georgia, Wisconsin, and Illinois to a certain extent in its primary election, where people had to choose between exercising their right to vote and putting their life at risk. And those poor, people working the polls are facing extraordinary risk there, especially if, as we expect, the virus bites up again in the fall. So the two are related. We have to provide state and local governments with the assistance they need to and the equipment they need and the training they need to provide elections on a broader basis, a wider scale, allowing people to vote over a longer period of time, and most critically, the ability to vote by mail. But the post office is probably running out of money because of the virus and other ills by the end of September. That fight will be brutal. And all these issues that we're talking about, I guess I'm well trained coming through Chicago politics for 38 years, but I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving. I am up for this fight. My country depends on it. Who we are as a people depend on it. I've traveled to 50 countries since I've been a member, and I think the way they treat us is this, Joe. We are a family member or someone they feel very close to, but right now they see us as being sick.
Yes, because we are, Mike.
And I think they hope we get better and that they'll be ready. But if the president wins, I think NATO is gone and our long-term relationships,
Thank you, Mike.
World order.
I don't mean to cut this off, but the computer is going to cut us off in about 10 seconds for the top of the hour break. Thank you, Mike.
No problem.
Thank you so much for joining us for Pride Week. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We're going to be back with much more after this.
Joan Esposito.
Movement. Mike Quigley